10B, receive a report on the widening of State Route 35 from Interstate 280 to Sneath Lane and I-380 congestion improvement projects.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. Back in May 2012, the San Mateo County Transportation Authority issued its Cycle 1 call for projects as part of the Measure A highway program. Staff approached the council a couple months later in July to request adopting a resolution to support a submittal of a grant application to perform the feasibility study for the widening of the State Route 35 from Interstate 280 to Sneath Lane. This State Route 35, otherwise known as Skyline Boulevard, is owned by Caltrans, and the widening of the section from Sneath Lane to I-280 has been an interest of San Bruno residents and the city due to the projected growth and development within the city as well as north of San Bruno. It is also listed as one of the transportation implementing policies in the general plan that was adopted in 2009. The issue for Skyline Boulevard is that the reduction of travel lanes from Sneath Lane to I-280 created traffic congestions during peak hours, not only for San Bruno residents, but for regional commuters. During the same time, another location that experienced congestion was the I-380 corridor between US 101 and Interstate 280. And this location was also considered for submittal of grant application. Since the implementation of the Skyline Widening and Interstate 380 corridor improvements will benefit the residents in San Bruno as well as South San Francisco, both agencies decided to be co-sponsors and applicants in the grant application. Both grants were awarded by the Transportation Authority. The Skyline Widening project received an $850,000 grant to perform the preliminary planning study, project initiation document, and environmental work, whereas the I-380 location received $500,000 to perform the preliminary planning study only. The agreements with the TA were executed back in March of 2015. The TA is the implementing agency who not only provided funding but drafted the scope of work, selected the consultants to perform the studies, and managed the consultants. The city staff provided support, coordination, and represented city in meetings. And the staff report in front of you contains information for each alternative and associated figures. Currently, we're not asking the council to select an alternative, rather to provide a summary of the results from the preliminary planning study that was completed by the TA consultants. And the TA contracted directly with their consultants. BKF was selected to complete the Skyline Widening study and AECOM for the I-380. And the results of the Skyline study indicated that there are recognized points of congestion at two intersections in San Bruno, one at Sneath Lane and the other one at San Bruno Avenue. And the traffic analysis indicated there are long delays in southbound during the AM peak hours between 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and northbound delays during the PM peak hours from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And the consultant came up with several alternatives to improve the traffic congestion, and one of them was to add another lane in the northbound direction, and the other one was to add a additional lane in the northbound and the southbound direction. And the consultant also looked at whether the traffic congestion will be improved if the intersection of San Bruno Avenue only is widened. And the last was to look at the widening of the lanes, additional lanes from San Bruno Avenue all the way to Sneath Lane, adding one lane in each direction. And the summary table with the estimated costs for these associated cost alternatives were included in the staff report. The traffic study indicated there will be a decrease in travel time if the improvements were completed. So after the preliminary planning study is completed, I know there was an interest in protected bike lane emerged. Although this was not included in the TA's consultant evaluation, it can be included in the next phase of work, which is the project initiation document, or otherwise known as PID. The PID is an important phase, as it's an opportunity to achieve a consensus on a project scope, schedule, and project cost between the local agencies, the TA, and Caltrans, and it's a basis for commitment of future funding as well. So once the PID is completed, Caltrans will authorize the start of the environmental phase. As mentioned earlier, the project is funded through the environmental phase, and no additional funding is allocated for the design or construction. If the council is interested in proceeding with the next phase of work and including the evaluation of the protected bicycle lane, the city staff will let the TA know of the city's interest. As for the I-380 corridor, the TA consultant looked at reducing traffic congestion and improving the traffic flow. There's also a safety concerns in regards to vehicles weaving along Interstate 380 as cars try to maneuver to exit El Camino. The TA's consultant derived various short and long-term alternatives to improve the traffic congestion and weaving issues. And the alternatives were derived for different segments, and detailed information for each alternative is also included in the staff report. And the short-term alternatives were denoted with ABC, while the long-term were denoted with XYZ, with each letter for each segment. I won't go into detail, but each alternative. But some of the short-term alternatives include like ramp metering, signage, striping, while the long-term includes construction of an auxiliary lane. So as mentioned earlier, this project, the preliminary planning study has been completed, and there's no additional budget allocated for subsequent tasks. And the next step of work is to complete the PID similar to the skyline widening. But staff will let the TA know if the council is interested in proceeding with the next phase of work, but there's, again, no funding for this. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Jimmy at this time?
Thank you, Jimmy. And I do sit on the TA currently, and it's completing my first year there. And I've seen these congestion projects come forward, and Redwood City with Woodside Road, that's moving forward. Highway 92 in El Camino is moving forward with funding also, and Foster City with Highway 92. So you get the $500,000 to do a preliminary report and everything. Is it now in the hands of San Bruno to, take a stake in, making these improvements and moving forward with that? Is that the way these projects, these long-term, large projects, get accomplished? Because I know they're very expensive, and I know the TA does help with funding, but, these cities that are within the area are also contributing.
Correct, and I think after discussion with the TA, Joe Hurley over there, and he mentioned that the city agencies have to support the projects in order for the TA to go back and seek additional fundings, and there, the city has to be engaged throughout the entire the process, and currently they only funded through a certain phase of work, and like, as mentioned, Skyline is up to the environmental phase, so there's potential to depend on the alternative that we select. It will cost an X amount of money, and that has to be determined at a later time where that funding will be coming from.
Anything else? We do have 4 speakers that wanted to talk to us on this item. Adam?
Good evening. My name is Adam Gazzetti, and I live on Highland Drive. Thank you to the council for allowing. Thank you to the council for allowing me to speak about this project. I am deeply concerned that widening Skyline Boulevard will harm the community and will not achieve the stated objectives and benefits of the project. First of all, the main goal here is to reduce congestion during the weekday rush hour, but it's doubtful that a widening would accomplish even this main goal. Highway expansions are known to encourage people to drive more than they otherwise would, and often you see after widening that the road quickly becomes just as congested as it was before. So South San Francisco is co-sponsoring this project. And actually their city staff wrote in a 2012 report that they supported it because they wanted a new route for their residents to use to get to 280. So I think that just shows that the project is not just about reducing delays for existing commuters, but is also for another purpose and expected outcome is to add more traffic to the road. Second, the report literally claims on page 12 of the environmental memo that widening the road will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think this is just an absurd claim. Putting more cars on the road will increase emissions rather than reduce them. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about safety. The study, this is the preliminary planning study, claims that widening the road will enhance safety, but this is just not true. Moving more cars faster just makes collisions more likely to occur, and also more deadly when they do occur. In fact, on April 11th of this year, San Bruno resident Scott Glasner was killed by motorists in a hit and run on Skyline Boulevard near College Drive. And this part of Skyline actually already has the 4-lane configuration that the study claims is somehow supposed to be safer. So to conclude, I would like to urge the council to examine this project with a healthy dose of skepticism and ensure that it is not fast-tracked for funding without adequate input from the public. And so this idea of protected bike lane, I didn't know about this when I was reading about it because it is a new thing, I think, and was not in the study. So that is a welcome addition. But I would say also to please consider formally requesting feedback from the San Bruno BPAC, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, honorable member of the City Council. I'm Jeffrey Tong, live on Fleetwood Drive. I'm not representing BPAC tonight, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, but would like to share my personal concerns in opposition to Caltrans' proposal to expand State Route 35 from Sneath Lane to I-280. Skyline Boulevard is utilized by international cyclists from the Great Highway to the San Andreas Trail. Most dangerous part of Skyline Boulevard is the junction at I-280 near Seton Hospital, and expanding the southern end will achieve the same. Caltrans revealed in 2015 that expanding highway merely attracts or induces traffic demand from elsewhere, evidenced by I-280. I-280 is already impacted 7 days a week, 365 days a year. San Bruno Council has just two options: expand or contract. Skyline Boulevard is already one lane from Westboro Boulevard to Hickey. Rather than expand Skyline from I-280 to Sneath, please champion the reduction of lanes from Sneath Lane to Westboro by converting the excess 4 lanes to 2 and using the excess for 2-wheeled vehicles. Skyline Boulevard is the only portal for residential subdivisions in the hills. San Bruno doesn't need more auto lanes, it needs alternative vehicle lanes known as cycle tracks. And the City Council needs the courage and vision to champion that for its residents. It's time for Caltrans to consider Skyline Boulevard not merely as a highway for automobiles, but as complete streets. It's time for City Council to think about reconnecting our community by building seamless networks of bicycle lanes and pathways that make it easy for residents to get where they want to go safely and stress-free without a car. San Bruno already submitted an OBAG or OBAG 2 grant application for cycle tracks between San Bruno BART and San Bruno Caltrans station in November. This is San Bruno's first cycle track ever. If approved, this project could provide Caltrans with the valuable data needed to convert Skyline Boulevard as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Malcolm?
Good evening, Malcolm Robinson. I've lived in San Bruno 27 years, and on the one hand, I want to echo the comments of Andy and Jeffrey, but on the other hand, I've lived in Portola Highlands for the last 20 years. I spent 15 years commuting to Silicon Valley, and it's true. Skyline Boulevard clearly is a tale of two cities. It's 4 lanes off 280, then it goes to 4 lanes, then to 2 lanes, then to 4 lanes, then to 2 lanes. There's a Class 1 bike lane, San Andreas Trail, which is a wonderful thing, and I'd like to see that extended all the way to Sharp Park Boulevard. But I would like to see the expansion go on. But I'd also like to see it made safer for bicyclists and pedestrians. Because with a Class 1 trail, with that kind of traffic, everybody's rushing, trying to get home, there's poor lighting. The roads in the 2-lane area are overgrown with bushes, so even though there's a wide shoulder, maybe 8 feet, 6 feet wide, it's overgrown, it's filled with debris, so it's really dangerous for bicyclists. So I'd like to see the expansion and extension of the Class 1 trail to make it safe. So, thank you.
Thank you. Aman?
Hi, I've lived on Martin Place for the past 8 years, and I'm concerned about the Skyline expansion because it's a very popular bicycle route, And there already exists a couple dangerous areas on Skyline where the shoulder vanishes completely. That's by Skyline and Sharp Park, both north and south of Sharp Park. And I'm concerned that if they do a widening, what will that mean to the bicycle access as well. Plus, I also work in the South Bay, and I commute either by Caltrain or by Corbett Shuttle. And I found that when traffic on 280 is too bad, our shuttle will actually use Skyline. So there's induced demand from that. And I don't know, maybe if they would add a carpool lane on 280, maybe the buses wouldn't feel like they have to trek up the Skyline to get around. But that's fine.
All right, thank you. So there's no action on this item, it's just a report?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Through the chair,
Yeah.
if I could ask staff, if I could ask staff, I mean, we had some concerned citizens here. What are we looking forward to now, or not?
So the director can speak further to this, but as outlined in the staff report, and we're speaking specifically about the Skyline State Route 35 concept plan, the next step, should the city council endorse the TA taking the next step, and I will note before I go on that this next step is funded by the grant that the director described earlier. That step would be the development of the creation of a project initiation document, which would further address the alternatives and issues outlined in the feasibility study, and would be, the director assures me, a venue for thorough consideration and for the report to address bike lane and other issues that have been raised by the audience tonight. So as outlined in the staff report, and continuing staff recommends your consideration to continue this process with that additional step. I'll note, however, that there is no funding currently available and on the horizon, foreseeably on the horizon, for further steps beyond what I've just described. So at this time, we are seeking your comments and interest, a statement of interest or not, as to proceeding with either one of these concept plans.
So if I could, we have two very viable volunteer committees that can keep this alive and effective, available to the residents close to Skyline Boulevard. So if we keep, I guess, advise the BPAC and the Traffic Safety Parking Committee to, look into this and stay on top of this and make, maybe even put it on their agenda, and for the time being, so that residents can address it and see if there's any updates and opportunities to voice their opinion. I think there's some very viable issues that we should, as a community, look into, whether or not we have Caltrans or the TA involved or not. So, or whether or not they're part of a grant process or not. I mean, we could look into, what potential improvements to a bike lane and lighting and such. So.
Through the chair.
Marty?
I want to echo Vice Mayor Ibarra's comments. If we're going to do a widening, we have to have the bike lanes there. If we're going to do a widening, we have to make sure we take into consideration the current parking lot that the people use on the trail at the top of San Bruno Avenue. So if you can pass that along. I understand we have another step to take, but we should go over there and state what we want, and that's what I would want to make sure that we would be including. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Do you want to?
Thank you. Malcolm Robinson again. I have a question for Ken. Has the CCAG BPAC discussed this? Is this just San Bruno's money? Because I think Jeffrey, or one of the other speakers, mentioned when you come off 280, it says Pacifica. The signage takes San Bruno residents down to the San Bruno exit, right? So it's a lot of people really going to Pacifica, which maybe should have been part of San Bruno, but that's another story. And Daly City and South City, and for those of us who live up on the hill, it's kind of a secret way to go north and south without much traffic, except during the commute times. So,
Well, just to directly answer your question, I started on the TA earlier this year, and so this was a 2015
okay.
expenditure from the TA, and so this is the first I've heard about it is through our city staff. So if we do move forward, I'm sure they'll at some juncture in the coming year that the TA will be addressing it.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment on Skyline Boulevard. I brought that up even with the new development being proposed out at Skyline College, plus the building they're going to tear down, and then they're going to rebuild. I don't know what entrance they're going to be using for all the trucks. That concerns me about the road up there. It's already not in great shape, but there'll be at least 165 cars coming out of that project on the south side of College Drive across from Marisol. And I brought that up that night, and I have very mixed feelings. I'd like to see the college do this, but also I see the impact, and I've even written Mr. Roadshow at the Mercury News. Years ago, I have his saying it would take about 20 years, which we're almost at that point, of getting anything even done, that there was no money for it, etc. So I think you have to not only look at the picture now, but what's going to increase the traffic and what are you going to do about that? I like the idea of a bicycle path, but bottom line is, if that can't be integrated, I think you got to do something about it up there. It's a mess. Thank you.